So welcome,
Yeah,
welcome,
that
welcome.
sounds super creepy, that little message.
I know. Welcome to our recorded Zoom conversation. So I'm really excited for this conversation for a lot of reasons because we're talking about abolition and we have two dope folks with us, Wakumi and Cam. So I will not try to introduce you. I will ask you to maybe introduce yourselves a little bit, and maybe just speak about how you came to abolition. And then I would love for us all to just like really jump into a honest, heartfelt conversation around like what abolition is, specific to us, specific to our work, and ways in which this can like really look in practice now, not 5 years from now, but like right now. So Cam, Wakumi, I don't know who wants to go first, but set it off.
Cameron, you're going first.
I just got told what to do, and when Rakumi tells me what to do, I do it. Morning, everyone. My name is Cameron. What to tell you about me? I a longtime friend of Jay's and of Wakumi's and student of the two of them. My day job is at something called the Center for Justice at Columbia University. The like most visible thing we do is the annual Beyond the Bars conference. I'm also a PhD student in social work at CUNY, and then am involved in a handful of different projects, including the New York City Transformative Justice Hub. There's a lot to say about my journey to abolition. The thing that feels like compelling to share is like, there's a part of me that I actually hope Wakumi would go first because our entry points are very different. And my entry point into abolition is sort of I came to this through intellectual, I don't know, conversation and classes and reading, and not through, like, I have lived experiences with the criminal legal system, but it's like being arrested for smoking weed and skateboarding and not being treated nearly as terribly as most of the people I know who have been impacted by the system. So it's not that my engagement with the system isn't connected to my journey, but it's not so prominent. Anyways, the reason why I'm sharing all that is I think that like what feels useful is that like starting, it's sort of for many of us, it's an easier lift to intellectually agree with the idea of abolition than to like fully internalize and believe that this is what we need. And a clear example for that for me that's come up in the last couple of weeks is like, I do think we need everyone to quarantine. And that's, I don't know, some people may disagree, but like we're in the face of a pandemic and this is like one of the main things we could be doing right now. And then how we get people to quarantine. And part of me is like, oh, we sort of like, there's a piece of me that comes up where it's like, oh, we need the state to come in and get people to quarantine. And that goes against my like abolitionist views. And I have to work through that and be like, is that really going to get us to what we want? And like, even if it does immediately, what are the long-term consequences of that? So I guess I'm saying that like, I came at this from, my first real introduction to this was like the new Jim Crow in 2010, and then lots of different things since then. But it's been a journey and still is a journey to really fully internalize that this is not what we want, that we don't want police, that we don't want prisons, that we don't want the state to be criminalizing anyone for anything. And so, yeah, my journey is one that has started from an intellectual place, but has like become a much more internalized place, and believing that this is not just right for the people that I care about, but for me and for my family and for everyone. So I will pass it to Wakumi.
Oh, go ahead.
Wakumi, really quick. I think something, Cam, I want to ask you really quick from what you just said, which I'm sure it's the same for a lot of folks who haven't had direct experience. What do you feel allowed you to go from having this maybe theoretical idea of like abolition to like, okay, this is real and practical, especially for a lot of folks who, similar to you, don't have direct experience to these issues and who have actually been privileged enough to not have to think about them in a deep way?
Yeah, I feel like, it's not one moment. There is this one moment that I have like distinct in my mind where like, where I've sort of tried to share this story before, and I'm not always the best storyteller, but like some of the thinking that comes out of abolition is that the system isn't broken, it's working the way it's supposed to. And like, again, that's an easy thing to say and be like, oh, that makes sense intellectually, but then to really believe that is another journey. And I remember walking to work one day and like listening to Miriam Kaba on some podcast and like internalizing it in a different way. and that feeling like a moment of evolution for me. I don't know, same thing with like restorative justice. When I first learned about restorative justice, I was like, oh, this feels valuable. This is right. This feels like the values that I want for myself and for others. Then I've like had the opportunity to experience restorative sort of community. And then that feels, you're like, oh shit, that's just not just intellectually right. That like feels right. Like in this moment, it's become even like, I have never felt more clear about abolition than I do today. And when you have a society that's like falling apart and can't get enough ventilators to people and can't get enough tests, you're like, holy fuck, like this is like, we have clearly invested in the wrong things. So I don't know, there's not one moment, but when I'm scared for myself. If I get sick and I need to go to the hospital, like, will there be a ventilator for me? I don't know, like that's just like looking at myself. Anyways, many moments. Yeah.
Thank you. Wakumi, welcome.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for going first, Cameron. My name is Wakumi. My pronouns are she, her, hers. How to introduce myself. Right now, my main work is with Soul Sisters Leadership Collective. I'm one of the co-founders and the current executive director. We do work around mobilizing systems-involved girls and non-binary youth to address cycles of state violence and poverty. And we do that work in lots of ways. I just direct folks to our website to learn more about our work. I am a social worker, a Black social worker. I went to Columbia and graduated. When did you graduate, Cameron? I always forget when I graduated. I graduated the year before you, 2009, 2000, I don't know, 11?
I graduated 2013.
So 2011, I think I graduated. And also come to the work as a person with just roots in traditional healing and Pan-African centered spirituality. And I mean, I think I came into abolition because, one, I'm directly impacted by these issues. I grew up visiting my father in prison. My father is still in prison. I grew up doing time on the outside with him. And so I'm just really intimately acquainted with how ineffective the system is and harmful and violent the system is, not just to people behind the walls, but also to people on the outside who are doing time with those folks. And so I come into it with personal experience. I mean, I also come into it just with deep ancestral roots. So, my people are Jamaican, and I think not a lot of folks know this history, but not all Africans who came to this part of the country were enslaved. Some Africans who came to this part of the world, I should say, fought. And on the island of Jamaica, very soon after Africans first landed there, they fought in wars against their captors called the Maroon Wars, and created their own, won those wars and created their own civilizations and communities, societies. And it's a complicated history because some Maroon societies did do slave catching and capture and bring runaway enslaved folks back to slavery, but also incredibly powerful history of resistance. And so I come from that history, and I think that that's the entry point for me ancestrally into abolition, because abolition is about freeing our people from what is essentially enslavement. When you think about what the carceral state really is, it's a if have you all seen the documentary 13th, right? That folks are able to work, essentially, their labor is able to be exploited while they're incarcerated, right? So that's just one of the many reasons why we need to get rid of this system. And so I come into it in that way. And I think I also come into it from a place of deep healing around racial justice. I mean, we know that this country has done innumerable wrongs to Black people and Indigenous people that this country has yet to even begin to rectify, right? And incarceration is just yet another version of a horrifying racial injustice and racialized violence. And so abolition is saying no, right? It's saying no. and it's saying we need to do something different, and we need a really deep national healing in this country. So I guess that's what I'll say.
Yeah, thank you, Wakumi. And maybe as a follow-up question, it would be great for you to like say what some of your work around abolition has looked like, because you're
Oh,
doing some
sure,
really dope
yes.
work. And but maybe let me plug you really quickly too, Wakumi. So for folks, I think of abolition along tiers, right? Like we don't just, like maybe we don't land to 10 immediately, but what are the things that we're doing towards abolition? And Wakumi's work has been so instrumental in ways that many of you are not even aware of. But the Beyond the Bars conference was started by Wakumi. And that conference I know has had a direct impact on me and my work as a social worker in thinking about like how we use education to transform and raise consciousness around these systems. And I'm pretty sure people across the country will say the same thing, because Beyond the Bars conference was probably like one of the first conferences in a school of social work that was actually, and maybe as Wakumi said, school of social work didn't really want it, but it was still like one of the first conferences by social workers to really like raise visibility of these issues and bring conversation to them.
Thank you for that plug. Yes, I'm
Absolutely,
gonna
but it's
flip my hair.
deserving.
Thank you for that. So Soul Sisters does a few programs that are focused on abolition, focused in restorative and transformative justice. There are two. I'd say this. I'll say Soul Sisters as an organization is seeking to be a restorative organization. So we use circles and circle practice and restorative style accountability measures within our organization internally. And then we're also doing some work externally that's really innovative in the restorative and transformative justice fields. One of the leaders of that work is on this very call, Melissa, who leads work called a program called Circles Not Cells, which, I don't know, Melissa, do you want to speak to it like really briefly? Do you want to say what it's all about?
Yeah, so Circles Not Cells is basically, it came from a couple of conversations, just realizing that youth who are already kind of at the intersection of various systems, already in contact, especially with the legal system, when they are in facilities, be they community placements, be they detention centers, whatever it looks like, even probation programs, like oftentimes when there's conflict between youth and another youth or between youth and staff, the measures are like punitive across the board, and at worst, they're getting another case called on them. So we have approached government agencies like, stop calling the cops on these kids, and instead, when there is a conflict like that comes up, to call us instead, and we'll come in and do a restorative intervention, and really just de-escalate it enough to make sure that there are other options available. And in the development of that work, have realized that a lot of that work actually involves doing some really deep staff training and support work, right? We can give youth the tools to de-escalate conversations, to think about different ways to approach conflict, and all of that is well and good, and it's useful work. But especially in these facilities, the people who have the power are the staff members. So it doesn't matter how restorative a kid wants to be, if the staff is really unwilling to divert from the policies of the place, from whatever it is. So we're really going in there and in partnership with the staff members and also with the youth, doing some support circles to allow them to talk about just like the vicarious trauma that they're experiencing. Youth who are systems involved are not bad kids, but oftentimes they're teenagers, and quite frankly, teenagers can be annoying sometimes. They can be really frustrating. That's just like a fact of life. And so just allowing them the space to talk about that, giving them some context and some other tools, and then also really just doing community building measures. So before we even started doing conflict intervention and de-escalation, realizing that in the same way that restorative justice in schools, when it gets used principally as an alternative to detention, it's not actually an alternative, it's just a new punishment. So we need to start integrating it using community building measures, trust building circles, just like really focusing on relationship to introduce folks to the practices and get them to build trust with one another, so that when we do need to go in there and do a conflict intervention, that relationship with us, and also amongst each other, has already been built a little bit in a way that can be very challenging once in facilities, right? Youth and staff already have relationships, but they are definitely playing roles. And so what we're trying to do in these community building circles is just get people to show up holistically, especially the staff, which we understand can be difficult. But we've seen some, yeah, so the goal is really to reduce recidivism first and foremost, to offer youth and staff like different models of de-escalation, of intervention, of restorative practices that they can utilize both inside and in their own lives. And then finally, really to transform these organizational cultures to at least shift a little bit more restoratively as opposed to punitively, so that we can really get to the root of a lot of the things that are coming up, the conflicts that are coming up repeatedly, as opposed to slapping a Band-Aid punishment on it and then like being frustrated when it comes up again in a day and a half. So that's our so far.
Yep. So that's circles, not cells. Thank you for that, Melissa. And I'll just say two things, just to tell two really, really quick stories to give folks understanding of the problem. One story, I talked about this program a year and a half ago on a panel, and a police officer, or no, a prosecutor came up to me and said, "Oh my gosh, this is so needed." Remember that, Melissa? Because we have a case where a police officer showed up to a residential facility where a young person was mandated to be because of an arrest in a case in the juvenile legal system. The cop was called by the staff of the juvenile legal of the facility because of some conflict that had gone on. And the police officer was saying to the staff, like, "You don't have any other options? Why are you calling me to deal with this sort of an issue? There should be another option that you all have to address this kind of conflict in the facility. You shouldn't need to call police. I'm a police officer. I have to make arrests. That's what I have to do, but I don't even want to do anything in this case." So that story goes to show the limited number of resources that exist for young people in facilities around addressing conflict, right? The facility staff didn't know who else to call. They called the police. The police don't even want to be there. There's a gap, right? Who's going to step in and fill the gap? So for Soul Sisters, we're answering the call to do that. And then the other case, the other story, just to share a little bit about, to understand the scope of the problem. Folks who are in New York City, but I don't know how many of you all are from New York City, but or studied the juvenile legal system in New York City, but a lot of the kids who get picked up on and get sentenced or charged, sentenced with crimes who are from New York City, oftentimes end up in facilities in Westchester County. So a lot of these facilities for young people are in Westchester County. So they end up in Westchester County in these facilities, and they're living there, right? So one really interesting fact to know is that the vast majority of girls in the juvenile legal system in Westchester County are actually from New York City. The only reason they're in the juvenile legal system in Westchester County is because they're picking up cases while they're in facilities that are supposed to be for their so-called treatment due to their being sentenced there, or they're in the foster care system and agencies up there in Westchester County. Does that make sense to folks? So again, demonstrates how many punitive measures are being used on young people who are one already in the system, or two, like literally orphans, right? Like orphans who are being criminalized. And if those New York City kids weren't up there, Westchester County basically wouldn't even have a juvenile legal system. So our kids are being used as fodder to feed the juvenile legal system in Westchester County. Big problems that we have. So Circles Not Cells is meant to address that. And then the second program that we're running, and I'll just speak really quickly too, because I feel like we're taking up a lot of time on what we're doing, but is a program that Stephanie is actually helping to lead in Miami. It's a restorative justice diversion program for young people for girls and non-binary youth who have committed high-level misdemeanor and felony crimes. And actually, this wasn't the case, Cameron and Jay, last time I saw you, I don't think, but the state attorney in Dade County actually signed our MOU so we can receive referrals now. We're super hype about it. So what happens is when a girl or a non-binary youth gets arrested in Dade County, if they meet criteria, they'll come to Soul Sisters right after the arrest. The case will be referred to us, and we'll handle the case completely outside the system using restorative justice with the person that they harmed and the youth who's allegedly committed the crime. No lawyers, no courtrooms, no metal detectors, none of that stuff that criminalizes our young people. The model comes out of California. We're working with Impact Justice out of California. They're helping to replicate this model in sites across the country. And we're one of those sites. We're the only site, and really, to our knowledge, one of maybe two programs that exist like this that are gender specific. There's maybe one other one in Baltimore, but again, to our knowledge, we're not dealing with high level misdemeanor and felony cases. So we're really concerned about something called net widening, and not wanting to, we want to only have cases referred to us that where the young person would likely end up being incarcerated, right? Oftentimes these types of programs are created and then they end up sending people graffiti cases and petty larceny cases and things where young people shouldn't be in the system to begin with. And we don't want those cases. We want cases where young people are likely to be incarcerated. We did one demonstration case, which the state attorney told us they would never send us any violent cases, never. This white man, he was like, I'll never do it. And then the first case that he sent us was a case where one girl stabbed another girl. And he didn't know what he didn't know what to do with it. And I was like, never, huh? And we did the case in this stabbing, and we handled it, and we handled the entire case outside the system. No legal system intervention, and there have been no rearrests, and the case has been resolved successfully. So that's the other abolitionist program that we're up to. Okay, I'll stop now.
Yeah, no, thank you, Wakumi. Super dope. Are you guys writing about that stuff? Just thinking about, again, so much of what you mentioned is cultural shifting. And I feel, you know, just really even within social work, there isn't a lot of imagination around the work that you're doing. So just even for people to see like examples would be like really great. So as a plug for that.
Thank you. If any of your students would like to help us with this writing, they are welcome.
you know what's funny? Folks found your work. Someone, I think Candace, you were mentioned in their work last week, right? Before they even knew you were coming. So folks are following you. We'll see what happens.
Yay.
Cam, really quickly, I think something that Wakumi mentioned, and I feel like you do a lot of work in kind of quantifying that, and maybe we can jump into some questions. Help people think around like restorative justice and transformative justice. I know that's a lot of work that you do, especially as it pertains to social work.
Yeah, for sure. I'm happy to talk about that. I want to share one thing really quickly that I came across this morning that I found really helpful. Let me see if I can share my screen. Oh, can't see my screen. Okay.
I can probably give you, let me see if this settings, I should be able to give you, try now.
Great. Awesome. Okay. Can you all see this?
Yeah.
It's just a Twitter. So this is Miriam Kaba, who I'm sure many folks in this Zoom know. Anyway, she tweeted this out, I guess 12 midnight last night. And it says, I heard this person speak at a meeting about comrades in Chile who marveled at the political fights inside the US. Their framework was that some people work inside the state, others against the state, and still others try to work outside the state, each requiring different strategies. And I feel like that is a really helpful framework for thinking about abolition, especially for social workers and social work, because so much of our work is often connected to systems that many of us want to not be a part of or don't believe in. The other thing I'll just share really quickly, is this still showing?
Yep.
The four eyes of oppression. This is like, I was thinking about this as we were talking, like if we did like a diagram and we had, you know, like on the one axis, like the inside against and outside, on another axis, you have like individual, interpersonal, institutional, ideological, and we could map out the kinds of things that we're doing. And I like Wakumi, I mean, I'm very much into frameworks, and this is part of, I think, my like masculine white socialization, and frameworks can also be kind of helpful, and that like they're like a compass, not like the end all be all. But I'm just thinking about what Wakumi was saying, and the work is sort of inside the system, but also trying to pull some of it outside. And for me, like I do some work inside the prisons that's trying to like support people in their healing and accountability despite the situation they're in. I do work that's against the system, trying to get people out. And I do work that's completely outside of the system of trying to build transformative justice sort of responses. And so like the idea, I guess the one of the biggest things I'm grappling with this year is like trying to get closer to the tensions and paradoxes instead of sort of like demonizing one thing and romanticizing something else. Like for me, especially in my identity, there's like a lot of tension in most of the things that I do. And I like to land at a place of purity just won't work for me. And I'm not saying other people shouldn't do that. Quickly, restorative justice, transformative justice, like there's a lot to say about both those things. I think the thing about transformative justice that feels important to carry from other people that I've learned from is that like the work of transformative justice is about what do we do when we can't rely on the state? We don't believe in the state. We don't trust the state. We don't feel safe with the state. What do we do? And I think at this moment, I'm curious about having more conversations about how people are staying safe right now and how people are like, if at all, working towards any kind of justice in this moment around interpersonal harm, given that lots of people are stuck in places that are not healthy for them. So anyways, I will stop there.
No, that's a really important point, Cameron. I know you want to open up the questions, Jay, but I just want to, a part of the reason why it's important, like Soul Sisters does leadership development work with young people. Young people get trained in circle, they get trained to keep circle, they get trained to engage these practices is so that they can become leaders in their communities. First week into the shelter in place, a young person, Stephanie may know a little bit about this case, called me to tell me that she walked out of her home, and as she walked out of, she saw a young person who she knows, 14 years old, bloodied, running with a backpack and no shoes, just running down the street, like clearly in a crisis. And that young person, who had been through pretty much every level of Soul Sisters programming, was able to stabilize the situation. Got the youth, did the thing, stabilized her, waited a couple days, knocked on mom's door, used some restorative questions, stabilized mom, totally outside the system, handled it. Okay? And so like, just to say that it's really important that as social workers, we're really engaging, how do we build power with people, right? How do we build their skills so they can be leaders in this work and aren't dependent on us, right? To run these interventions for them. People don't need us to do that. And what are we doing to make sure that our clients, the people we're working with, have the skills and tools like we have to be able to intervene on their own behalf, on their own community's behalf when we can't be called, right? That's really, really important. I think it speaks to what Cameron's talking about and is absolutely abolitionist in terms of the value of making sure people can secure themselves and secure their own people when they need to. Because frankly, as a lot of us know, social work sometimes operates as an arm of the state, right? We're mandated reporters, okay? We have to be calling the state on people all the time. Sometimes we're not going to be able to show up for our clients because we're arms of the state. So how do we make sure the people that we work with can do for themselves, right?
Absolutely. And Wakumi, thank you so much for saying that. And I think something that underlies your work that I hope everyone is listening to as well is that so much of your work is centered on healing, but not only healing for community, but also making sure that your own staff, yourself, I know you and talking a lot about your own healing and transformation, because if we're not doing that work, I've said this to my class so much, but I feel like you emphasize that in everything that you're talking about. We probably turn to the state when we feel like we don't have the capacity, right? Because it's really, we haven't done the work. So we haven't done the work to sit with someone who's in immense crisis, right? We haven't done the work to sit with people who are in grief. So it's a lot easier for us to then rely on the state apparatus. And I think, thank you for sharing that. So maybe let's just jump in. I know you only have, I want to be honoring of your time. Oh man, you got to like jump off in like 5 minutes, Wakumi.
I know, I have like 7 minutes.
You have 7 minutes. So maybe if folks have any questions, Cam, what's your time frame? Can you 12 or?
I'm good till noon yet.
Okay, cool. So maybe let's just jump in. Maybe questions for Wakumi and Cam.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Oh, okay. So basically, Pit Diddy, he has this station called Revolt TV, and pretty much what he did for his latest episode, he had brought like different, Black leaders, and how, you know, like basically having them share their perspective on the COVID-19. And one thing that I shared that, like, you know, the government is practice social distancing, but you have people who live in communities where they can't really practice that. Like, you know, he grew up in a project. So like in the projects, for you to get to your apartment, you gotta take the elevator, which is like 4x5, pretty small, but people are forced to live in those environments. So like, what would you say when it comes to like social distancing? Like, how can we protect ourselves? Like, what are some tips or advice you could share to those who are going through those experiences? And yeah.
It's really hard right now. I mean, what comes up for me is, it's really important for us to just, you know what comes up for me right immediately is we need to, before, and this is like, may not be super helpful for the immediate, but before our people sort of enter into a crisis, we need to be putting them, sometimes, here's what I want to say. Sometimes we keep like a lot of this good revolutionary radical stuff to ourselves and we don't share it with our people close to us, our family, our friends. We keep it sort of just within our folks who are like-minded. We keep it just for ourselves, just in our social work classes, just with our grad school friends, right? Just in the sort of movement. But what feels really important to me is that that we're sharing these tools with folks in our family, with our people from our hoods, from our places where we're from, so that they have some sense of what alternatives exist out there for when we're in a situation like this or any other situation where we can't or don't want to engage the state. It's just really important that we spread the word and share the tools, even if we're scared and we feel like people are going to think we're crazy or nuts or whatever. It's important that we're talking to our folks about this. That's what comes up for me off the top. I don't know, Cameron?
I don't think I have any good answers. But one thing to say, I mean, like people probably seen this stuff on social media, that the police being the response to try and make people social distance is not the answer. Like how to support people in being as healthy as they can. I think like what's the, I don't know, you know, what's the healthiest people can be and how can people support people to do that? And like, it's a bit of like harm reduction. I don't have actual ideas about what that looks like, but I can say that police are not the answer.
I think we're kind of
add something really quickly.
Yeah, go ahead, Melissa, jump in.
Yeah, so two things. I think number one, in response to your question, Kevin, I want to come back to something that you said, Jay, is about documentation. So really being like, this is what we're being asked to do, and like, this is why the conditions don't allow it. So I feel like that's a really important thing. And then also just really wanting to stress that we've been talking about shifting from punishment, but the point of restorative justice, transformative justice, all these kind of community accountability measures is not to like have people running around doing whatever they want consequence free. It really is about accountability. So how do we, in saying we need to remove ourselves from these systems, like how do we build the skills and the communication tools that we need within community so that we can hold ourselves accountable and think about like, yo, you're not making, like if you're out here like gathering in a group of 15 people and then you're getting on the elevator where my grandma has to get on the elevator, you're not actually doing your part as a member of this community to keep us safe. Like what does accountability look like? And if you are not willing to do that, then what does consequence look like until you are ready to like rejoin the community, basically.
Absolutely. And I think that was a piece, thank you, Melissa, and I think that's a piece that I was going to go right. It's so important that we build community, whether it's virtual community, whether it's in-person community, to co-create, you know, answers to this, right? Because this is going to have to be co-created. Folks are going to have to come together and devise a plan of like, what does our space look like? How can we navigate this space in the healthiest place? And I think, again, this is the emphasis on why community has to be central in any type of movement in response to this. And even last week, I got a call from one of my my boys who's incarcerated, and you know, I was asking him like, "What's going on?" And he was telling me like, "Well, we don't have masks. You know, they're not really doing things that are like safe for us, but we're doing things right. Like we're making sure when we go to the yard that you know, like we wipe down the weights. We're making sure that you know, like we can't wear masks, but you know, they're given like 10 to they're creating like maybe their restrictions are groups of 10. He's like, no, but we're doing groups of 3. You know, so I think it's like, again, building community of like-minded folks. So again, create norms and ways of moving to address a current situation. Any other questions or thoughts as Wakumi has to run soon? Wakumi, one of the things that folks have asked for is if there's if you have like a maybe a Soul Sisters email that folks could reach out to you at, or who would be the point person at organization, if you could probably just throw it in the chat, that would be awesome.
Sure, I'll throw it in the chat. And then I'm
Yeah.
seeing a question about like,
Mhm.
how are we changing at our agency in response to the coronavirus? So I'll say a couple things and just ask, because I have like a couple minutes. I have a meeting at 12,
Yeah.
and just ask Melissa and E to step in if I miss anything. Is that okay, Jay? Can I respond to this
Yeah,
question?
absolutely, please.
I mean, I think we're doing our programming virtually with young people right now. We have a staff who typically run programs in person in detention facilities and schools and other places, who we wanted to make sure we retained, and we didn't let go because of their drop in hours. So we reassigned folks to do twice a week outreach needs assessment calls to young people who are in our programs, who have been in our programs in the past. So we're making hundreds upon hundreds of calls on a weekly basis to find out how young people are doing. And then the social work team that we have on staff are doing case coordination and supportive counseling, and helping people get connected to how they can meet their basic needs. We're running a couple of really fun virtual spaces, a virtual healing circle, and a virtual dance class. And we're also focused on getting our staff what they need to be able to work from home. Working from home like is a classist, idea. Some people can do it and some people can't do it because of their living situations, their access to tech, their access to internet, etc. And so our organization has been, once we realized how long this was going to be, about 3 weeks in, we started asking the staff what it was they needed and getting staff what they needed to be able to do their work, and similarly for young people. Did I miss anything, Melissa and E? Is there anything else you would add about what we're doing?
No, I don't think so. I think we're also right now in coalition with a lot of folks, both in New York City and across the country, trying to learn from each other and also leverage like our areas of overlap and kind of where we can support each other's needs, to really think about like beyond the local, which is an important approach to take, but how do we make this, how do we make sustainable change or like create sustainable responses for young people across the country, and not just the ones in our local community.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions for Wakumi and Soul Sisters before they, or Cameron too as well, before they go? I think one of the things that they did really well is to give you concrete ideas of what like abolition looks like in action, right? And I feel that we often talk about abolition, and thank you, Cam, for always, given that framework of the 4 eyes of oppression. I think it's easy for us to think about abolition as just, I love the Frederick Douglass quote we use this for, which is, abolition is not just the end of slavery or the end of prisons. It's like the transformation of society. And everything that, you heard Wakumi Cam speak about is like challenging narratives, challenging the ideas of oppression, challenging interpersonal ways of being in regards to oppression, working with people to dismantle like internalized mechanisms of oppression, while similarly working towards a society where everyone has value and equity. And Wakumi, thank you for bringing in the Jamaican piece of this, because whenever I feel like if there's an easy way for people to think about abolition, for me, it's like Bob Marley's War, and from the Haile Selassie, speech to the UN, where he's like, until the basic human rights are equally guaranteed to all without regards to race, until the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes, there'll be war, right? And like, I think as people who are working for justice, it's integral that we recognize that, actions aren't aligned with dismantling systems of oppression on all levels, we're going to continue to have some type of like oppression and injustice.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Could I share?
Yeah, please, Cam.
I just want to make a plug for something else that's happening right now. I mean, it's probably not a surprise that prisons are terrible, period, but particularly terrible at this moment, especially for folks who are more vulnerable. So there's pushes across the country to get people out. And I'm involved in some of the work, particularly in New York State. So I'm going to share two links, and one is RAP, which is the Release Aging People in Prison campaign, which has been sort of leading some of the work in New York State. And then we're actually going to put up a website in the next day or two called cuomoletthemgo.com.
Yes.
So I'll put that there. It's like password protected at the moment. But you can call the governor, you can get on social media and join the social media campaign. You can let people know that we are trying to get people out. So I'm going to put those in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Cam. Maybe the last thing that I would ask of you both is that one of the things that we're doing is we're doing a praxis project, and we're really trying to figure out how we can, move from theory to action. So all these things that we've talked about this semester, to just really in knowing, the state of the world right now, especially for people impacted by carceral systems, what's something that we can do to show up to be in community and to do to show up to be in advocacy. So Cam, that was one way. Wakumi, anyone from Soul Sisters, if there are any other projects that you want to plug right now, please take a moment to do that, as we are receptive in all ears.
Well, Wakumi's thinking, I'll just say that there's a lot of mutual aid work happening. And I teach at Columbia, and one of the final assignment options is for students to do a mutual aid project. And I'll just put two links in the chat. And one is a mutual aid project that I'm involved with, which has actually been able to raise almost $20,000 for folks who have come home to get them money, and which is amazing how much people have given. And then there's another website that Dean Spade has put together that's a bunch of resources about mutual aid, including pod mapping. So I'll share that.
Thanks for that, Cameron. That's awesome about the 100K. That's super dope. The one thing that comes up for me is something that is New York City based. And Melissa has really been bringing this up on our team. New York, Mayor de Blasio has canceled summer youth employment program. I don't know if folks have heard about that. That's a really big problem for New York City youth who are relying on really the funds, but also the engagement over the summer. For one, to provide for their families, and two, so they can provide for their families in a way that doesn't involve criminal activity and criminal behavior. And so there are a couple of surveys going around. I can try to look in my email for the last one that I filled out. It'd be great just sign up, just sign off on the petition. The online petition is a simple thing to do. And then I know Girls for Gender Equity is doing some, just had a press conference, a virtual press conferences about this, and maybe doing some other actions. And so I'd follow them, GGENYC, at GGENYC online, and see what kinds of engagements they have coming up in the future. But that's a really, really big hit to our people.
Any final thoughts or words, Cam, Wakumi, Soul Sisters Collective?
I would just say that abolition and living restoratively really starts small. So even when you come into conflict in your own lives, thinking about what are some ways that we can restore the situation without leaning on punishment, and that practicing that, because it's uncomfortable and it's a skill that takes work to build up, but practicing that makes it so much easier to be willing to envision what that looks like on a larger scale.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Thank you, Melissa. Anyone else? Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Wakumi. I appreciate your time so much. So great seeing you. Hopefully we'll see you in real time soon. Thank you, Cam, so much. Much love. Thank you so much. Thank you, Soul Sisters, Melissa, and everybody else, and all your team. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Wakumi. Many blessings.
Thank y'all. And good luck with the rest of the semester. I know it's tough. Hang in there.
Thank you. Thank you. And
nice to be with you all.
Absolutely. Keep doing the work, fam.
Thanks.
So I'm going to end the recording.